Texas Monthly.
Karoni Forrester lives in the hills west of Austin, Texas, with her husband, her daughter, who's in her early 20s, and their 3 dogs. Last fall, I went to meet her at her home.
Hello!
Howdy!
I walked in, carrying my recording gear, and immediately, Karoni spotted the big, furry-looking windscreen on my mic.
You know what they call it? It's a dead cat.
Oh, I love dead cats. They're the best kind.
Karoni is funny and expressive, and she loves to laugh.
We went to Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago, in Lancaster, which is just a few miles from Intercourse, Pennsylvania, and Blue Ball, Pennsylvania. So, of course, we had to go be those people stopping in front of the signs and taking pictures.
But she has a serious side too. And visiting her home, you see that right away. When you walk in, the first thing you see is a wall covered with mementos of her father and of her activism on behalf of MIA families like hers.
And so I'll tell you, I wanted all this on display, but having it by the front door serves 2 purposes for me. One, it's very much a huge part of this family. So this is a great place for it where we can honor him and really represent all things Dad, but also it's not on the wall directly in the living room or on the TV because it can be heavy to look at it all the time.
In a glass case are some of Ron Forrester's ribbons and medals commemorating his military service. And there are photos of Ron, including some with a baby girl.
And then this actually is a picture from the cruise book when he was in Nafong, which was nice to see, and he actually is smiling there. So that would be the last picture I have of him.
Yeah. He was a handsome man.
Yeah, I think so.
And this photo of you and him, so he's wearing his flight jacket. Is that
His flight jacket and his Aggie ring.
And then the photo of you and Ron up here, you're wearing like a little birthday cone hat, so...
I would have been 1, because he was in Vietnam when I turned 2.
As she grew up, Karoni got to know her father from mementos like these, and the stories her family told. Her uncles were full of stories about their childhood shenanigans. There was the time Ron climbed onto the roof of their house so he could parachute off, or the time he nearly blew his hand off in a science experiment gone wrong, and devoted himself to rehab so that one day he'd be able to fly. He was a man with a mission. Karoni also had a mission: to learn what happened to her father. And her family agreed. She was just like her dad. Nothing was going to stop her. From Texas Monthly, I'm Josh Alvarez, and this is the final flight of Captain Forrester. Episode 2, A Daughter's Search. When Karoni was 4, her mother remarried. Karoni was into gymnastics and dance, and she played baseball with her stepbrothers. Her stepdad coached their team. They'd ride bikes around Odessa and stay out playing until the sun went down, just like her dad and his brothers had done.
I guess in that way, it was somewhat of a normal kid's life. It's just that I didn't know where my dad was and when he was coming home. For a long time, it wasn't an if. It was, he's got to come home. And there's all these people that haven't come home yet.
During the war, there was a wave of advocacy for POWs in Vietnam. Across the country, people wore silver bracelets stamped with the names of American servicemen, often someone they'd never met, along with their rank and the date they went missing. In January 1973, a month after Ron went missing, Vietnam released a list of American prisoners of war. Ron's name wasn't on the list. Here's Ron's brother, Don.
Of course, there were people who previously had been known prisoners of war that were not on the list. So it was clear Vietnam was not being totally truthful. But you just don't give up hope.
The POW movement became something else, a movement advocating for more than 1,000 men who had been missing but never came home. In the past, of course, there have always been families left to wonder about a loved one who didn't return. In the chaos of war, bodies often can't be recovered or identified. It took longer after Vietnam, but eventually, President Jimmy Carter allowed the military to reclassify the missing from MIA to killed in action. Ron's official status was changed in 1978.
And that was just a brutal assault on our family from our perspective.
Now, if the family wanted Ron listed as MIA, it was on them to come up with the proof he was still alive, which, of course, was impossible. But that didn't stop them from trying. Karoni's mom's father went so far as to have reward ads posted in Vietnam, asking if anyone had seen Ron. And they weren't alone. As late as the 1990s, Americans bought ads in Vietnamese phone books, asking for information about their missing loved ones. For some MIA families, this change felt like a great betrayal by their president. Actually, though, the military had been preparing to declare MIAs dead as early as 1973. The decision was delayed because of a lawsuit by MIA families. The federal government investigated. But when they didn't find evidence of prisoners still alive in Vietnam, Carter finally went ahead. In Arlington National Cemetery, not far from where Ron's casketless funeral happened, is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It was built after World War I. 60 years later, it contained the unidentified remains of an American service member from World Wars I and II and the Korean War, as a representative for all the missing and unidentified from each war. After Vietnam, President Jimmy Carter broke with tradition and did not inter remains from Vietnam. Part of the reason was that, with new scientific advances, it seemed possible that all the unidentified American remains would eventually be identified. But this didn't sit well with veterans groups or MIA families. And a few years later, Ronald Reagan reversed course. He decided to add the remains of a serviceman killed in Vietnam.
My fellow Americans, Memorial Day is a day we honor the dead of our wars. We're also gathered here for a special event, the national funeral for an unknown soldier.
Actually, the military had an inkling who the remains belonged to, and they were identified in 1998 as belonging to an Air Force pilot named Michael J. Blassie. But the funeral went ahead anyway, and Reagan timed the ceremony for Memorial Day 1984, the year he was seeking re-election.
For the war in Southeast Asia still haunts a small but brave group of Americans, the families of those still missing in the Vietnam conflict. Vietnam is not over for them. We write no last chapters. We close no books. We put away no final memories. An end to America's involvement in Vietnam cannot come before we have achieved the fullest possible accounting of those missing in action.
Despite what Reagan said, to some families, it did look like the government was closing the book on the war and its search for missing Americans. That's exactly what it sounded like to Karoni, who was now a teenager in West Texas, still holding out hope that her father was alive.
Here was this unknown soldier from Vietnam, always on the news. This is the end of the Vietnam War. And I'm 13 and hormonal, and I was pissed. What do you mean it's the end of the Vietnam War? Where's my dad?
For Karoni, it was a catalyzing moment. She decided to take action, and she wanted to find others determined to do the same.
And here I'm this young teenager trying to find my way. And when I was 14, met other family members for the first time. That was a life changer for me.
She met them at an annual meeting for the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, or just the League. Maybe you haven't heard of the League of Families, but you've almost certainly seen its flag. A black and white silhouette of a soldier, and a prison watchtower in the background, and the words POWMIA, you are not forgotten, written around it. The League was started in the late 60s by a small group of women, many of them the wives of pilots who went missing or were imprisoned in Vietnam. They were frustrated by the lack of information about their loved ones, and the culture of silence the government was imposing. What started in a few living rooms very quickly became a well-organized, well-funded national network with thousands of members. Politicians were quick to act. By 1972, League leaders were meeting with President Nixon in the Oval Office.
Well, as a matter of fact, these women are so nice, and by God, they just cheered, and I came in. When I got through, they were all crying and cheering, and it was amazing, really.
This is him, on a recording from the Oval Office, after one of those meetings.
And I just want to assure you that from that moment, 69, presidential priority has been given to the POW thing. And I can assure you, ladies, gentlemen, that not only publicly but privately, I have pursued every channel, and we're pursuing them today, and we're going to get them back. I just put it that way.
He and his team hoped the families might put a sympathetic face to an unpopular war. But with their demands for information about their loved ones, they weren't a group that any politician could control. And every president after Nixon had to reckon with the League. After Karoni turned 16, she traveled to Washington, D.C. for her first annual League meeting. Reagan was president, and the League was approaching the height of its influence. Karoni wanted information from the government about her father, whatever she could learn. And time was of the essence. What she really wanted was to find someone, anyone who could give her answers. And very soon, she did. A key to understanding the urgency behind Karoni's search is back in her hometown, in downtown Odessa, just outside the county courthouse. There's a stone monument there, dedicated to the residents of the county who served in the Vietnam War. Ron's name is etched on it, along with the names of 49 others, those who made it back, those who were killed, and as the epitaph reads, those POW MIAs still there. That wording may seem odd today, prisoners of war still in Vietnam, but in 1987, when the memorial was placed there, most Americans believed there still were POWs who'd been left behind, and that the Vietnamese and American governments were hiding the truth about them. Even as late as 1991, 69% of Americans believed there were still POWs being held in Vietnam. So this wasn't fringe thinking. It was a major preoccupation in American culture. And Karoni, at age 16, was steeped in it.
When I was growing up, you've got Rambo movies coming out.
Rambo, you're probably aware that there's almost 2,500 Americans still missing in action in Southeast Asia.
And then you got Chuck Norris MIA movies. They're going and looking.
Where are the American MIAs?
Even Hollywood thinks there's guys still alive, right? But on top of that, there are news stories of live sightings of Americans being held prisoner.
One former POW, an Army Green Beret named Mark Smith, said he had evidence that there were still dozens of POWs in Vietnam. A former Special Forces officer named Bo Greitz mounted recovery operations, backed by rich and powerful Americans.
Then you're hearing about Ross Perot funding these rescue missions. That's not Hollywood. That's real shit right there. That people are going and looking.
For Karoni and for thousands of other MIA families, there wasn't any hard evidence that their loved ones were dead, even if the government now said they were. There were people out there, even some veterans, who claimed to know there were still American POWs in Vietnam. And in January 1988, one of them walked into Odessa.
Hey listeners, it's Aisling Ayers with Texas Monthly. Spring is all about fresh air, sunshine, and good food. After a busy weekend, there's nothing better than a HelloFresh box waiting at my doorstep. I'm looking forward to some delicious protein-rich options, like the crispy panko sesame chicken and the saucy pork burrito bowls. Please help us thank HelloFresh for supporting the final flight of Captain Forrester. Go to HelloFresh.com/flight10FM right now to get 10 free meals with a free item for life. Every HelloFresh meal uses high-quality ingredients, including seasonal fresh produce and proteins that travel from the farm to your doorstep. And the deliveries are flexible. You can pause or skip when you need. Meet your health and money-saving goals this spring with HelloFresh. Feel great with meals that fit your spring schedule and make the season even more delicious. Go to HelloFresh.com/flight10FM right now to get 10 free meals with a free item for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only, varies by plan.
Karoni had just come home from a basketball game, and her mom showed her a story in that day's issue of the Odessa American. On page 9A was a photo of a man with a buzz cut and a large, square-shaped head, walking past the Vietnam Memorial at the courthouse. His name was Thomas Clift. The story said Clift was a former POW who'd been in prison with 227 others, and it said he believed 2,400 Americans who were MIA at the end of the war were still being held prisoner in Vietnam and Laos. Clift was in the middle of an epic 4-year journey on foot, from Portland, Oregon, all the way to the East Coast and back. He called it his last patrol, to call public attention to the POWs he said he left behind. Karoni's mom wondered about this guy.
And she said, do you think you want to talk to this guy while he's in Odessa? Well, absolutely, I want to talk to him.
Karoni figured maybe, just maybe, he knew something about her dad.
So we go meet him, and he picks my dad's picture out of a cruise book, saying, yeah, that's him. I was held in prison with him. And he tells me the story about how my dad had third-degree burns from the crash and how he had packed my dad's burns in mud and all of those kinds of things that you would do to care for a man, but how gung-ho he was, that absolutely, he was still alive. I never thought about my dad being that injured. That hurt. Oh, I cried and cried and cried.
The thought of her dad in a prison camp brought a new level of despair. But at the same time, Karoni felt a surge of hope.
I'd been given this information. My dad was alive. Now I had a chance of getting him home. I was just going to have to take care of him because he was hurt. But I'd do that.
And now she had some new friends to lean on. She called the Texas state coordinator for the league.
And she said, hang on, I need to do some research.
It turned out the guy had made the whole thing up.
And it was all a lie. It was devastating.
The man's real name was William George Clift, not Thomas Clift. For whatever reason, he'd been using his brother's name. And while he was a Vietnam vet, he'd never been captured. All along his last patrol, he had duped who knows how many people. Karoni thinks it was just a lucky guess that he'd pointed out her dad's photo from the book.
That grew me up real fast when I was 17, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. So he was gone by the time people came to arrest him, because I would have loved one more chance to get at him.
You went driving out looking for him, I think.
Certainly did go looking for him. It's a good thing I didn't see him. But he had been walking from town to town, and there's not that many roads out of Odessa. I had my little red Mustang, and I was wearing my dad's flight jacket, and I was loaded for bear. Or whatever that is in West Texas terms.
Karoni never found him, and he apparently abandoned his patrol. But her search for her dad went on.
Never once did I think I wanted to stop looking for Dad. It just made me madder.
Karoni went to Texas A&M, just like her dad. And she was there in 1991, when the next war began.
And an explosive development near the Persian Gulf. Word that Iraq has invaded neighboring state of Kuwait, with fighting reported along the border.
Operation Desert Storm only lasted a month, but by the time it was over, 23 Americans had been captured, almost all of whom were pilots or aircrew.
An American A-10 over Iraqi positions. First pictures of the battle at the border.
So far, the officially reported casualties have been few in numbers, but each has a name, a family, and a hometown. None is confirmed dead. They are all officially listed as missing in action.
And, people talk about how they know exactly where they were when Kennedy was shot. And it kind of rocked me in that same way when I heard Dan Rather's voice say, "We have our first MIA. His name is Michael Scott Spiker. He's from Jacksonville, Florida."
The first missing in action named by the Pentagon, F-18 pilot, Navy Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker of Jacksonville, Florida. 33 years old, father of two, missing in action over Iraq.
And it felt like my world just tilted. because it was happening again.
A pilot, missing. And he had 2 young children, including a 3-year-old daughter. What happened to Karoni was happening to someone else.
And it really threw me for a terrible loop. To where I got in a pretty dark place. I started questioning why I was at school at Texas A&M.
She left school. Her family worried, but they weren't sure how to help.
But what happened during that year was, not only was I grieving for his family and what they were going through, I was grieving for those kids because I knew what life ahead looked like for them. But I'd been wanting to find my dad, and I'd been very focused on my dad. And feeling that family's grief, that shifted my focus to where when I came out of that dark hole, every MIA mattered. Every MIA had families. I wanted to work for every MIA.
She went back to school to finish her political science degree, and she was committed now to helping other MIA families. But then, one day, in her mailbox, she found a thick envelope with a report from the government about what happened to her father. Here, at last, was everything the government claimed to know. But what she found inside was a thick report full of bureaucratic jargon and horrifying details.
And it's full of body parts and body fat floating on rice paddy water. It's the most disgusting thing that I'd read.
The report is hard to follow, but basically this is what it said. In the summer of 1992, Department of Defense investigators had gone to Quang Binh, a province in central Vietnam, where Ron was heading when he disappeared. They went there because the Vietnamese government had shared a registry of graves for pilots who'd been shot down in Quang Binh. And this registry had included a Ronald Wayne Forrester, Ron's full name. Several people in one particular village, called An Thuy, reported witnessing a plane shot down nearby. They even said they had helped bury remains recovered from the wreckage. According to those witnesses, it had been a catastrophic explosion. The plane and body parts were scattered all over a field of rice paddies. But their testimony was conflicting. Some insisted the shootdown was in 1967, 5 years before Tiny 05's mission. Some said they saw a parachute deploy, and some witnesses quietly told investigators that Vietnamese officials had coached them on what to say. It wasn't at all clear if the remains they described, the body parts floating in the rice paddy, were Ron's. Several villagers produced pieces of wreckage, scraps of metal and other parts. They said had come from the plane that crashed in the rice paddies. But the investigators couldn't say what kind of plane this was. The report's conclusion was deeply unsatisfying. Yes, a plane probably crashed somewhere near An Thuy, but there was no telling if it was Ron Forrester's plane, or even if he had been killed in the crash or parachuted out. As Karoni absorbed the conflicting information and the raw, graphic eyewitness testimony, the report didn't seem to her like an act of transparency. She saw it as an attempt to shut her down.
You just really want us to all go away? You're going to gross us out so bad that we're not going to ask any more questions. Is that what you're doing?
If that was what the government wanted, though, it didn't work.
It's, in fact, some of the best advice ever given to me in life. I was 21 and I'd gone to a reunion with guys who flew with Dad. But I was sitting with a man and, you know, he just had tears rolling down his face telling me that he waited and how hard it was for him to step away. But then he said, if something doesn't make sense, you don't have all the information. Keep asking questions. And quite honestly, I've applied that everywhere in life. If you don't get it, it's because you're missing information.
Karoni doubled down on her involvement in the League, and her hope that Ron was still alive, as painful as that became.
Well, I think that what had been my biggest hope became my biggest fear, and that he was alive in captivity for over 20 years, feeling betrayed by his country and forgotten by his daughter. That terrified me. And so I was probably in college right around the time that I just started being very afraid that he was living like that. And then you have to start trying to figure out, when do you make the decision that he's dead? So I feel for those that are living with the torment that their loved one is still in a prison today. Because there are people that do believe that, and until we can get them an answer, they're going to continue to live with that, and it's pretty terrible.
All MIA family members have to grapple with this uncertainty in their own ways. Larry Forrester, Ron's youngest brother, remembers his mother had hope at first, in part because of what the government told the family.
And they sent us stuff about interviews with officers had shown that if he was in captivity, he could weather it well. He was in excellent physical condition and had a great deal of fortitude. He would survive just the pressures of being captured. So therefore, I think in your mind, you assume he is alive because of what they said.
Larry says their parents, Wayne and Neva Forrester, weren't the type to demand that the government give them more.
They were a humble, quiet, salt of the earth people, and they suffered, but they suffered quietly. When my mother died, again, nobody had interviewed with the guy that wrote the article, but he wrote an obituary, and he said that all these years, Neva Forrester has wondered what became of her son. And I think a great line, he says, Neva Forrester died yesterday. Now she knows.
What became of Ron? The grief, the doubt, the fears about what he might have endured? Everyone had to decide where those things belonged in their own lives. Larry eventually moved to Oklahoma, where he worked in the oil and gas industry. And it was just around the time Karoni got that first report from the government that Larry felt something change for him.
So I hesitate to say this, but I felt like early one morning that God was telling me that your brother's with me, and I have him, and someday you will be reunited. And it seemed very real, but at that point, I felt fairly confident he was not coming back. It had been 20 years in.
For Don, it was a gradual process.
I can't tell you what year, but at some point you realize the likelihood is really, really pretty non-existent, but you still don't give up hope. And so without the certainty, you're never done with it.
Don stayed in Texas. He worked with children in the foster system and served as a Baptist pastor. He's also written books about his journey to finding peace with losing his brother. But even if Ron was dead, his family members still faced other questions. How did he die? Where's his body? How hard would they try to bring back whatever might be left of him? And how willing were they to trust the government's process?
In our visits with the government, the ones that we had, they would tell us we're doing the best we can and put you off, and we would say, well, we understand and appreciate all you're doing.
But that wasn't good enough for Karoni. She got a reputation for finding officials and holding their feet to the fire, of not accepting we're doing the best we can.
Everybody grieves different, and probably paths people take in their own. I'm not trying to be too nice about how I say this. I'm just going to be blunt. I decided I was going to flip tables, and I wanted to get an answer. Not everyone I don't know, you're talking to some people in my family. I know people were writing letters to the government before I was able to write, right? I know that there were actions taken on their part. Did anyone just get staunch and say, fuck this, I'm not taking no for an answer, tell me where my dad is? I don't think anybody got right in that space with me.
So again, for a vast majority of people listening, it's going to be just a totally different world. So like, what do families who are in this position, what do they go through when they're seeking answers from the U.S. government about the whereabouts of their loved one?
So in a standard year, you probably have the ability to get to one regional family member update and then an annual meeting in Washington, D.C. And the government will fly 2 family members of each MIA to Washington, D.C. for those meetings. You have to go through your casualty officer, and they'll set up time for you to sit down with your analyst and anybody who's doing the operational work in the field to let you know, this is what we think, what the next steps are, that type of thing.
You can tell, Karoni has talked people through this more than a few times. And you can probably also hear how opaque this process can be. There's a casualty officer assigned to communicate directly with each family, but also a case analyst, another Defense Department official who oversees the search. And then whole teams of analysts, scientists, logistics people, the ones who actually go looking. And then once a year, the government will fly you to Washington so you can hear what they've been up to.
And so you kind of go into that meeting with anxiety of, what are they going to tell me this year? Have we finally made it, above the line to where we're on the schedule?
The schedule she's referring to is called the Master Excavation List, the Defense Department's list of sites where they plan to dig next. Making it on the list is a big deal, but some years, the update is just no update, maybe next year.
So there's a bunch of hurry up and wait. In my particular case, for us to gain any traction, what we wanted to do was have a magnetometer.
Basically, a metal detector.
To use in the rice paddy to help us identify where the crash wreckage would be. Are we even in the right damn hole?
Every year, Karoni would ask about the magnetometer. And every year, there was some new holdup.
There are only 2 that we can use, and they're really, really big. Okay, then go do that next year. Where's the magnetometer? Well, we don't have it this year. So 5 years of me bitching about a magnetometer. We finally get a magnetometer, and this bozo doesn't put it in the rice paddy. He put it in the friggin' canal next to the rice paddy, and no one thought a plane went in the canal. Ever. No one said, look in the canal.
Talking to Karoni about things like this, I started to get a sense of how frustrating this was. So many tedious battles over so many years. But I don't think it's even really just the magnetometer, or even the guy running it. It's just that you're tumbling down this dark hole with no end in sight, and you're grasping for whatever you can find. A magnetometer, a dig date, a witness, someone who maybe saw your dad's parachute deploy, a Vietnamese document that says your dad was already buried somewhere halfway across the world. They're all you have to hold on to. And another year goes by, and all you have still are these scraps. After college, Karoni started working in corporate America and eventually settled into a 20-year career at Apple. But her passion was the League. Even as Ron's case seemed to settle into a stalemate in the late 90s and 2000s, Karoni's involvement with the League grew, She became the league's coordinator for Texas in 2000.
What the league really did for me was bring me to other families. And I still believe that MIA families need other MIA families. Because what we're up against is there's no textbook, there's not an instruction manual.
Every year, some families would finally get answers, but not Karoni. Nonetheless, she dedicated herself to learning the ins and outs of the agencies and policies, and she became a resource for families trying to understand their cases. She earned a reputation as an outspoken, happy warrior for the cause. And in 2009, she was elected to the board of the league. Still, she held out for a breakthrough in her father's case, even as she saw many other families lose hope.
But for some families, it is too frustrating to continue. Like, okay, if this is all you're going to give me, I have to accept this. And then there's some stubborn people like myself that say, no, you're just pissing me off.
Decades after Karoni began searching for her father, she got a breakthrough. But it didn't come from the government. And it launched a whole new investigation. One will follow in the next episode.
So I give him the scrub sheet, and he's looking at it like, I don't think this part here makes any sense. And I'm kind of looking at him like, yeah, Mr. Know-It-All. How are you going to know whether that makes sense or not? You don't. And within 20 minutes, they were able to tell that there was wrong information in my dad's case.
That's coming up in The Final Flight of Captain Forrester. The Final Flight of Captain Forrester is a Texas Monthly production. Our executive producer is Megan Cright. The show is reported and written by me, Josh Alvarez, and written and produced by Patrick Michaels. It was produced and engineered by Brian Standifer, who also wrote the music, with additional production by Ella Kopakin and Aisling Ayers. Story editing by J.K. Nickel, Ross McCammon, and Mark Warren. Paul Knight is our fact-checker. Artwork is by Emily Kimbrough and Victoria Milner. Archival tape in this episode is from Millennium Films, Amazon MGM Studios, CNN, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, CBS News, the Vanderbilt Television News Archive, and the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. See y'all next week. Thanks for listening, and if you don't want to wait for the next episode, sign up for a Texas Monthly audio subscription to hear it right now. You'll also get bonus episodes that'll take you deeper into the story, and unlimited access to everything at texasmonthly.com. Visit texasmonthly.com/audio.